Welcome back to What's Next with Lacey, the podcast where I interview young professionals about their career journey so far. This week, I spoke with Nicole, a finance associate in the commodities division of a financial institution. But Nicole started her career as an environmental engineer at an oil company. So we talk about finance, we talk about engineering, but perhaps most importantly, we talk about how and why she made the switch from one to the other. Within our conversation, she perfectly explains how careers are long and winding, and it is always important to follow what interests you and be constantly evaluating what you want out of your career. And so if that means a career pivot, then to not shy away from that. As always, I get the story, the advice, tools, tips, and tricks, and so much more. I hope you learn as much as I did from my amazing friend, Nicole. Nicole, welcome to What's Next.
Hi, Lacey. Thank you for having me.
Of course. No, I am so appreciative of your time and for you to come on and talk to us about your career journey so far. I am so ready to dive into your story. I feel like despite having known you for a very long time, I feel like I've never actually sat down and listened, and we've never done a full deep dive into your thought process with your career.
Yeah, I don't think we have before. My fiance and I have this joke that if your career isn't a one or two words and it takes a sentence to explain it, no one really will ever know what you do unless we have an hour conversation like this. So I'm excited to be here and talk more about my current job and my career journey.
Yeah, so let's dig right in. And I will preface this with, I know absolutely nothing, as you do know that, but I'm prefacing this for the listeners as well. I know nothing about your field. And so I do want, and I feel like a lot of our listeners probably also won't know a lot about your field either. So we are going to take it right back to the basics and go through things just in as much detail and as possible. So you currently work in a large financial company, and I know that it has a lot of different divisions, but you are in the commodities division. What
Correct.
does that mean? What is a commodity? What do you do in a commodities division, essentially?
So a commodity is any good that could be purchased or sold or traded. So coffee is a commodity, gas is a commodity, different metals are commodities.
Okay.
And a commodities division may look different at a variety of different banks, but I'm essentially sitting on a trade floor where individuals are trading products every single day. And it could be financial instruments tied to a specific commodity, or it could be that physical commodity. And there's a variety of different roles within my division that have to do with the financing of products within the commodity space.
Okay. So where do you fit into that? What is your role?
Within this commodity space, there's a variety of different roles. One of the more well-known roles is a trader who's taking risk on specific price movements around a commodity such as gold, copper, oil, gas, coffee. So if they think the market is going to move in a specific way, or the price of gold is going to go up or down, they can either buy or sell that gold in order to make money. So if the price of gold goes up, you buy low and you sell high. The area that I'm in, instead of taking risk on a commodity, we're using the commodity as collateral for money that we've lent out the door. So say there is a project in development, my team invests capital or loans capital to that project developer in order for them to lease the land, build the facility, generate whatever end product or end commodity that comes out of this project and facility. And if for some reason they're not able to make payment, we can take over that asset, so that building that land, or take the commodity into our own inventory and then sell it into the market. So the structures, the financial structures I look at are a variety of different mechanisms where if shit hits the fan, which hopefully it wouldn't,
Yeah.
we can recoup our money through the sale of a commodity.
Got it. So then what do you specifically do? What are your responsibilities as this associate in this division?
So teams within the commodities space on the commercial side focus on specific deals. So a client comes and needs capital for this reason, and we look to execute that deal. And that involves diligencing documents, building financial models in order to project out what your returns or your cash will be in the long term, writing up legal documents alongside the legal team and reviewing them to make sure the specific binding agreements are in place, and assessing a variety of different risks that might be associated with the specific opportunity and coming up with the mitigants that can be put into place with the client in order to provide this financial solution. So at an associate level, you are a more junior employee on this team. The rankings per se in finance generally are analyst, associate, vice president, manager, director, and that can look different at every single company, but associate is one of the more junior levels. And you're providing support to that senior individual on the team who might be driving the transaction and engaging internal stakeholders and the risk department in order to put capital out the door to essentially bring money back in. And for me personally, I've looked at metals markets, carbon markets, oil and gas markets. I've looked at a ton of different commodities, and I've been able to engage with clients and assist in the origination of new deals, go through the process of engaging in different internal groups to understand specific transactions, modeling, diligencing, all of the things I've just listed, I've been exposed to and have been involved in all the way through the execution of a deal, bringing it across the line. So I've had lots of responsibility for an associate, and I've been able to learn across a slew of different verticals.
That is so interesting and so involved. I want to ask, what are your hours? I can imagine that they change drastically as a deal progresses, but generally speaking, what are your hours for a job like yours?
Yeah, so the hours in finance really vary depending on market conditions, specific sector that you're in, what your role is. For me, I find that I have a lot of autonomy in the hours I work as long as I get the work done.
Yeah.
So when things are really busy, it's very long hours when you're trying to get a deal across the line. But then sometimes there's lulls where you're waiting for different information back from clients, or you're originating new opportunities. And in those instances, the hours could be a bit lighter. So there's this cyclical ebb and flow.
Yeah.
And it very much so changes. At any given time, I could be having conversations with 20 different companies, just trying to learn what the company does, what are their needs, what are some of the financial solutions that they're looking for. And if I'm out and originating, I could also be traveling as well. And travel, your hours are long. Or if you're meeting with a client about a specific deal that's further along, maybe it's a site visit, which is travel again, where the hours are longer.
Yeah.
So the terrible answer that I hate to give, but applies to a lot of things, it depends.
Yeah, 100%. You've been at this company for a bit. How have your responsibilities changed as you've grown at the company? Have you just shifted groups, or have you also been promoted and so your responsibilities have grown? How has that been?
Yeah, so for finance as an industry, there's typically responsibilities associated with each level as you become more senior in your field. And there's nuances depending on the exact group that you're within. And analysts will be given a lot of modeling. Modeling isn't putting on high heels and
That
walking
would
the
be
runway,
dope.
going into Excel and crunching numbers for hours and working on financial models. So typically an analyst will work on a lot of modeling, an associate will still have a lot of modeling, and then start to gain some more responsibility on internalizing what some of the numbers may mean. And depending on the place, you may not have much client engagement until you're really starting to move into a VP role. That has not been my experience. My experience has been you are involved in the whole process, and your title is an indication of years of experience. But if you can advance and are showcasing skills above your level, it's encouraged to get involved. So I've been working on, depending on the deal, a variety of different tasks, and it's very open-ended. I wouldn't say I have a normal set of responsibilities for each opportunity that we look at.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and this may be a very dumb question from someone who has not been in finance, but you said that you spend a lot of time as an analyst doing a lot of models. Did you learn how to do models when you got to your job, or is this something is this in like a general sense, not specifically for the work you were doing, but do you learn how to do models in school before you get to a financial institution? As a super non-quant person, like I've always wondered that.
I think it depends. I think there's some schools that offer classes for it. If you're getting a business degree, you're likely going to have a financial modeling course. If you're in associations or clubs that are heavy into investment banking or placement into these types of fields, some of those clubs and organizations at your university will give boot camps and programs. There's also external sources like Wall Street Prep, for example, that offer these courses that you can pay for to learn. For me, I was an environmental engineer. I worked in Excel and I did modeling, definitely, of different types of projects, but I wasn't looking at the financials, and I had no experience in financial modeling. So everything that I've learned has been on the job. And I've taken a few courses in my free time to come up to speed, but I had no experience before.
Well, we've been out of college for a bit now, sadly. But you didn't start your career in finance. You started your career as an environmental engineer. What does an environmental engineer do? Why am I picturing like a hard hat, like being on the ground working with tools? Is that what you were doing as an environmental engineer?
Yeah, some of what I did was hard hat, working on the ground with tools on site.
Love it.
But being an environmental engineer means something totally different depending on the field that you're in. It's this interesting umbrella degree, in my experience, that touches a lot of the other engineering fields and looks vastly different depending on your job role and what company and sector you're working within. So you can go and work on developing solar plants, or you can do project management, which is the area that I went into, or you can do research.
Yeah. No, it can mean a lot of things depending on what you were doing. You said you were both in a project management role. Like, what did that look like? Were you in an office? Were you working with a team? What were you managing?
Yeah, so I was looking at the environmental socioeconomic risks associated with large scale development in the oil and gas space globally. So if a company were to go to South America and start drilling for oil and set up facilities there, what my role is to make sure that they're doing it in a sustainable way. So maybe it's speaking with the local EPA, it's creating monitoring.
What's an EPA?
Environmental Protection Agency.
Love.
Or maybe it's creating monitoring and measuring reports in order to ensure that this facility will operate in a way that is required by law and within the company's sustainability goals.
Why did you decide to start your career in this space? And I know you said you studied engineering and environmental engineering at college, but what drew you to this specific work when you were coming out of college?
Yeah, so I wanted to go into a role where I would have increased responsibility at a junior level. And I felt that the company I hired into in the space that I was in gave you that responsibility very early on. There was also the opportunity for me to join, and I did join, an entry-level class that was focused on field experience and emphasized travel heavily. So I spent my first 6 months of my career doing lots of traveling around, and I would rotate in hitches, working 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
Wow.
My 2 weeks off, I would travel with my entry level class to different places around the world. And my 2 weeks on, I was spending time in the fields, boots on the ground, learning how the operations work, unrelated to the environmental space. And after that program, I saw different careers within the company I was at and was able to select the one that, again, gave me that increased responsibility. And I always knew I was interested in the environmental space. And I found that this project manager role in the environmental space allowed me to have a very large impact in a region that a lot of times these projects are bringing new jobs, new infrastructure, a whole new way of living in developing nations where they haven't really seen projects of this scale. So I felt like the impact I could make and the company's ability to allow their junior employees to have responsibility, an increased level of responsibility, placed me where I ended up to start my career.
When you were working on the field, what did a day look like for you?
Yeah, so the program that I was in, the main goal was to have engineers who were previously students, just graduated, who joined the company, go through this experience that will allow them to have in the field expertise at an operator level before moving into the engineering world. So I was shadowing operators of facilities every day in the field, which has nothing to do with environmental engineering, but gave me the experience to understand, like, this is how the field workers look at different problems. These are the personalities. This is how the team is managed. They're waking up at 4 a.m. and fixing issues for a project that was designed a certain way, but if it was designed slightly differently, if one valve was put in a different place or one opening was slightly lower, the problem would be solved in a much shorter time frame. So it was giving myself and others who maybe ended up in those more technical roles where they are designing facilities, that on the ground experience of, this is what an oil and gas field actually looks like.
Yeah.
And this is how it looks.
Yeah.
So I was waking up in a hotel room, meeting a different operator in the office, jumping on in their truck, and then riding around the beautiful mountains of Appalachia in the fall and going wellhead to wellhead, facility to facility, and just seeing what they did in their day-to-day job. And some days I was unpacking and packing compressors in different facilities, and other days I was walking pipelines and marking if there were any potential issues that can be visibly seen from above ground. So my days were
Different.
long,
Yeah.
and very different than any job that I potentially could have.
Yeah.
In the environmental engineering space, which is usually pretty heavy on the desk job.
Yeah. Do you think then, when you did move to your project management role, that you really utilized the skills that you learned in this experience that you had?
I think some of the softer skills, yes. I pivoted industries slightly. So I went from looking at environmental and socioeconomic issues in the oil and gas space and going to oil and gas fields to spending most of my time in the carbon space. So within the global carbon world, the asset can look very different, but the bread and butter maybe, or what's mostly thought of is forests, and it's planting or it's conserving forests that already exist. So that field work does look different, but I think understanding how people think and work in the project realm, it was very transferable.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Why did you then decide to go to finance after this experience? What drew you to finance, and specifically into the commodity that you started in?
Yeah, so I was always interested in finance. I actually started my education in a dual degree honors program where I was going to graduate in 5 years with both a degree in finance and a degree in engineering. I got rid of the finance when I transferred to Columbia and stuck with the engineering, but it was a space that was always in the back of my head as something that interests me. I found that nexus between technical solutions and the marketplace very fascinating. So when I was an environmental engineer and I was looking at the project management space, I was thinking long-term out at my career and where I can see myself in 5 years, where I can see myself in 10 years. And it wasn't in an engineering role. And it wasn't in a project management role. So I began to think, like, where do I want to be? Knowing that I was probably going to land somewhere in the business space, I began networking and understanding what different people were doing in a variety of different financial and business sectors, and landed on like this area of finance because I knew I wanted to look at energy transition and environmental solutions, and I wanted to bring solutions to fruition in some degree. And as an environmental engineer, you look at one project for 5 years, and you often look at one small scope of the project for 5 years. So I wanted to be in a space where I could do the things I just mentioned, but across a variety of different companies and sectors and verticals in order to broaden my understanding and learn more about a ton of different things. So I didn't want to help one company, for example, obtain financing in order to bring one solution to market. And naturally, I found myself starting to move towards the finance space as well as consulting, where you're looking at so many different things all the time.
Yeah.
And I can be assessing 20 different deals at one given moment. So the opportunity to learn was just tremendous. And then from there, through networking, it was what areas, again, allow me to have the most responsibility? Where do I feel like I culturally fit into? What does the day-to-day look like? And I landed within this very specific sector of finance in the commodity space.
How did you network? How did you find the people that you wanted to talk to? Did you just LinkedIn stalk them? Did you happen to know them? Did you ask friends? How did you successfully do that?
So it was, what year was that? 2021. We were a year into the pandemic, so that would be 2021.
Yeah.
And I was meant to move to South America to live in an area that would have been extremely isolating during a global pandemic for my job. And I was really excited at first to experience a different culture and really have more field experience, be on the ground in a place. And for me, it's always impact. How can I make the most impact? I thought this would be a great opportunity. But as I dove into what I'd what my new role would look like, I realized during a global pandemic, it would have been sitting in an apartment in a foreign space, not communicating with the local people, not able to experience the local culture,
Yeah.
and not really even able to go to the field as much as I would have wanted to. And I went into panic mode, and I'm like, I knew I needed to make a change at some point. I think now's the time. So I blasted out different emails, contacted a variety of different people, anyone I could think of. I asked them if they knew someone who was in the environmental space, who specifically was maybe in business, even if they weren't, that was okay, and started from there. So
Oh.
friends like you, Lacey, who maybe have no exposure to the industry, I'd ask you like, hey, do you have any friends who are doing this? And then lo and behold, I got a bunch of different contacts in spaces that maybe weren't exactly what I wanted to do, but I started to narrow my scope and understand what it was I was looking for. And then usually, as a good rule of thumb, if you're having a conversation with someone, I would try to form one more connection from that.
Mm-hmm.
If I was speaking to Jen over at the solar company, I would make sure to ask if she knows anyone in a different space, or can I speak to someone else at your company or at one of the previous companies that you've worked for, and then slowly just networked my way down the path closer to what I decided I was interested in. So it
That's
happened very forced. It took a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And if we weren't working from home, where you can jump on Zoom
mm.
random hours and take a phone call at your at home desk on the spot for 10 minutes, I don't know if I would have had the same ability to move into an entirely new space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Networking is a lot of work and a lot of effort, and it's a lot of emails, but that's really good advice, that to ask your friends, ask anyone and everyone for who they might possibly know. And then indeed, I also totally agree about asking for someone else at the end of the conversation. I was given that same advice very early on in my, networking career. And I think it's very useful to do that, because people won't think of it, but always have someone to suggest. I now want to dive into your journey to your career path that you have been on and been talking about. You have mentioned that you studied environmental engineering. What drew you specifically to environmental engineering? You talked briefly about how it touched a lot of the other fields, the other engineering fields, but was there something else that specifically drew you to environmental engineering?
Yeah, so I started as a mechanical engineer, actually. So freshman year as an engineer, you take a bunch of very general courses in the STEM field. So your basic sciences and your basic math. And you don't really need to say what your major is too early on, but you can, and you can decide what you want to do. And for me, I was like, oh, mechanical seems pretty applicable. It's a large major. I'm going to do mechanical engineering. And then as I was selecting my coursework for the following year, a lot of the more specified engineering and other courses that called out to me were the nexus between the environment and engineering solutions. So there was no environmental engineering program at Lehigh, but it could be a sustainable development course, how to bring water to a rural community that's in need. And I felt like with all of these different, predominantly environmental, but also a flavor of socioeconomic issues that were rising, I thought this is an area I can make an impact. It's like, why am I working every day? For me, I want to work to make a change and to make the communities that I'm operating in better. And I felt like environmental engineering as a degree was a very clear way to study something that would enable me to do that. When I went to transfer universities, I found myself looking at the environmental engineering programs because as a transfer student, you typically specify which degree you would like to get, and applied to Columbia's environmental engineering program, not 100% sure if I was going to stick with it. And then once I was thrown into the beast that is the Foo School at Columbia, I realized it was the space that I was meant to be in.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. And I love that. I love how much you want to make an impact. And I love how that has been the central narrative to your story at every step. I think that's really inspirational. And honestly, I would love to find a way that I could do the same.
You're doing it right now.
Oh, yeah. This
helping people learn about different fields that they may not previously be exposed to.
True. This is my impact right here, right now. You did also some internships during college. And firstly, how did you go about finding the internships that you did during college? And do you recommend them for the path that you ultimately went down? And what do you think you learned most from the internships you did?
So something that I realized later in my career was that it's okay to have internships that aren't directly related to where you end up. Your career is long and winding. You're constantly learning about what you like and don't like. And I have no idea where I'm going to be in 10 years. And 10 years ago, I had no idea that I'd end up in finance and commodities, investing capital into the energy transition and the environmental space. So at the time, the internships that I had were what I thought I was interested in. And for that reason, I think they had lots of value. I interned at NASA and I also worked in a laboratory at Columbia. I thought research would be the path that I wanted to go down, and climate change research specifically. And I quickly learned that was not the case, and that I was more interested in the solution than the science behind the problem. And the laboratory I worked in was great because it was working towards a solution. But at NASA, I was looking at different climate change patterns as it related to a very specific niche, and researching different in a very quantitative way, something that might be occurring, but you need 6 more years of research to really determine that. And it could be a problem, and maybe there was this solution in the long run. It wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But it was great for me to have that experience and determine that wasn't the space I wanted to go in and understand what I did want. So I found the internship at NASA. NASA's not a very well-known company. No one really knows that name. So it was a bit really understand what it was. No, I'm kidding. So NASA, everyone knows NASA. And so I looked online and saw that there were internship openings, and my internship was actually during the semester because as a transfer student, I had to take classes during one of my summers. And it was 40 hours a week. So I was a full-time student while working full-time. You knew this, Lacey.
I knew this. I completely forgot that your internship was full-time.
The NASA facility was a satellite office, and it was right on Columbia's campus, essentially. So it made it fairly easy for me to work and also take classes.
Even though it's nearby, fairly easy is a statement in and of itself. You were absolutely doing full-time engineering school and also working for one of the most impressive companies, I think, like that exists. Like everyone knows NASA. And the work that it does is obviously rather remarkable. So I think let's pause for a moment and give you more credit where credit is due, that you did that. I completely forgot that you did that. How did you do that?
The environmental engineering program at Columbia was very closely tied to the master's program. So most of the classes I took, my last 2 years were grad classes. So they were at night, which was great. So I would wake up and I'd go to NASA for working hours, for the 8 hours during the day. And then my classes would start after 5 p.m. and I would go to my slew of night classes. And yeah, that was my schedule.
When did you do homework?
After in the week, on the weekends, after the classes, I took a little bit lighter of load that semester. So I think there was maybe one day I didn't have classes after work. So I would do them that day or only had one class. So
Gosh, that's remarkable. Can I ask whether you were paid by NASA?
Yeah, it was a paid internship.
Thank God. If you were doing this unpaid, I would have been like,
Yeah, it was more of a co-op than internship. It was a really great opportunity to apply some of my learning real time that I was experiencing in the classroom to a job, which I don't think a lot of people have had that experience of learning something at night and then showing up to work the next day and being like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
This is this. And connecting those dots.
Would you recommend someone doing that?
I think it depends on your personality. For me, that was one of my most successful semesters. I performed very, very well that semester. I also ran a half marathon, worked out every day. Like having that structure and having more on my plate in a very structured way made me use my time better and more efficiently.
Yeah.
So I spent those semesters 3 months heads down and just did what I needed to do. And I think it worked for me. I think for people who don't like their degree or don't like the job that they're in, it could be extremely excruciating to do that. The internship I was in was a true 8-hour-a-day internship. It didn't spill over, but I know lots of internships and jobs that's not the case. So I think if you know you're time bound in a certain regard, it makes it easier. But if you're about to be an investment banking intern and take classes at the same time, that looks vastly different.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like I needed to do that. I needed to have another work opportunity because I felt behind since I didn't have the ability to do a summer internship due to the fact that I transferred. Maybe that's just societal pressures.
Yeah.
But junior year internships could be competitive depending on the field that you're going into. And I didn't want to start that application process without having some work experience related to the field on my resume.
I totally understand that. I kind of feel like I felt the same in entertainment. I mean, I also definitely did better when I interned during the school year as well, because I completely agree. I think I just have the same personality where it's like I need my time very structured, so I know I have X amount of time to get something done. Otherwise, I will procrastinate beyond belief. Is there anything else that you did during college that helped you figure out what you wanted to do after you graduated? Was there a class that you took? Was there a book that you read or anything like that that helped you figure out more about the field that you were going into?
I don't think I did a great job of it, to be honest. After that NASA internship, I was offered an extension into the summer and decided to extend it into the summer, kind of knowing already this wasn't the area I wanted to go in. I could have used that as an opportunity to go and do something else and see what a different field is like. There's tons of programs that I didn't even know existed where big companies, especially in finance, offer weekends or a day or a week where you can go and learn more about the company or the field with these offsite programs where you physically travel to that company's location and get to do a deep dive into case studies related to the work that they're doing. For example, there's many programs I've after the fact heard of that affords you that opportunity to get more experience in areas that you think you'd want to go into. I didn't network to the extent I should have. I'm telling you all the things I did wrong. I
No, that's
don't feel like
useful.
I did much, but what the process was weirdly simple for me, and I'm a very indecisive person, and I typically can't make a decision to save my life. But we were going around the room amongst my peers in the environmental engineering space, and we were all talking about our summer internships from junior year. And one of my peers talked about this amazing job they had and what they're going to be doing in this entry level engineering program at the company that I ended up working for. And as soon as I heard that, I knew that's where I wanted to go.
Cool.
So that was very early on, senior year. I heard it. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I applied. It was one of the first companies I applied to. I decided to take the job, move to a city I'd never been to before, knowing no one, but it felt like a very easy decision. Like, this is a once in a lifetime experience, and I want to do this. I do wish I wasn't as close-minded about fields that I thought I would never go into, like finance. I think when you hear finance, there's a certain stigma that comes along with it. At least at Columbia, I felt there was, where for me, I associated it with this big bad thing that I could never be interested in. It's so outside of what I want to do, but in reality, it's so broad and so general. I closed the door on that without even speaking to a single person in the space at a career fair. And it took me getting older and hearing about what some of my friends and peers were doing in different spaces to realize maybe that is an area I want to go into. So I think I could have done a better job trying to learn more about different fields. And for those of you listening who are in college, it is a bit harder to do as an adult.
Yeah.
When you're young and you don't know a lot about anything and you're still a student, people are very willing to explain to you what they do and teach you what they're interested in, and are very receptive to a younger person poking and prodding and asking questions than an adult. So if you're a student, now's the time to reach out to as many people as possible, and it's never going to come across weird. If anything, people are excited to share their experiences. And I've been contacted by a bunch of Columbia students, and I always take the call because someone has to explain what I do in order to understand it.
Exactly. And show that there is more to a field than you think you know just from the people you've been exposed to. No, I think that's super important. I do want to continue down this path of advice. We are almost ready to wrap up, but I want to get more excellent advice from you. Starting with, what is the best career advice you have gotten from a person, overall or specific to your field?
I think I touched on this a bit earlier, but your career isn't a one-stop shop. You don't sit down when you're when you're making your decision coming out of college and say, this is what I want to do, and that's who you are, and that's what you do. I'm a project manager, and I will be for the rest of my life. That's not always the case. I think it's winding, and you can be many different things all at once. I'm an environmental engineer who's in finance, and maybe in 2 years, I'll be something totally different. But if you're interested in a variety of different spaces and areas, your career's long. Explore them all.
Yeah.
Map it out. See, how can you get from A to B? Are there stepping stones to get there? And if something changes, then move a different way, but follow what you enjoy. And it's ever winding. So I think the best advice that I was given is to not be afraid to pivot and to change, and to look at your career as a bunch of little chapters versus one big story in the same space.
I love that. And I think you've slightly touched upon this in terms of how you navigated your college experience. But if you could go back and change just one thing about how you did your career path / college experience, what would you do?
I have two answers for this. For college experience, I would have taken a step back and understood the purpose of being a student isn't to get good grades, but it's actually to learn. And I would have taken more classes for things I was interested in versus what would look good on my transcript. And for professional experience, I would have networked, reached out to a ton of different people and professors in the field I was in, but also other fields that were similar, maybe sustainability, maybe even the grad program architecture department, and just learned as much as I could, and then kept in touch with the people I did network with. Yeah. One conversation you learn a lot from, but if you follow back up and you keep in touch with them, that's a connection that you can utilize for the rest of your life.
I totally agree. I will say I did, when I was in college, I always said that first thing to my tours. I was a tour guide, and everyone would be like, you want to be in entertainment, but you're studying history. Why? And I always said, college is educational, not vocational. And I will have so few chances to just be in an environment where I can learn and do nothing but learn. And that is why I chose to be a history major, because those were the classes I was interested in. So completely agree with that. And also agree with your other wonderful piece of advice. I think staying in touch is wildly important.
And I have one more.
Go for it.
That's the twist and the turning. Don't be afraid to take risks. Because if you're not thinking outside the box and you're not pushing yourself and making decisions that make you uncomfortable, then you're never going to achieve your highest potential. So risks are a good thing, and sometimes you're going to fail, and that's okay. But if you don't take risks, you will never achieve your goals.
Yeah, that is very, very important advice. I think then, to wrap up this advice section, what advice would you have for someone who wanted to go firstly into environmental engineering, if you still want to speak to that space, and then secondly, the sector of finance that you are in?
Yeah, so I would start with something that's more general, but I think is extremely important, specifically with environmental engineering. When you look at a job, there's the job description and there's the what you're doing. Managing environmental risks, handling socio-economic stakeholder engagement issues. And you may be super aligned with the overall mission, and it could be in the space that you really want to work in. But then there's also what you are doing physically in your day-to-day. Are you on the computer? Are you in the field? Are you engaging in meetings with different people all day? And I think keeping both of those things in mind is really important, because you can take a job that's in the field working, but maybe you're not aligned with the overall mission of the company that you're working for, but your day-to-day is amazing. Maybe you're at a company where you're aligned with the overall mission and you feel like you're making a big impact, but you spent your entire day doing a task that makes you want to pull your hair out. And I think keeping in mind that those two things are very different. Yeah. When you're looking at environmental engineering specifically, thinking about where you want to be long-term with that frame of mind, and also considering the lifestyle that you want. To hone into the same advice, environmental engineering, I'd say network and find out and ask those questions of what do you do every single day, and get the specifics of I'm brushing my teeth and then I get in my car and I drive 5 minutes or I drive 3 hours and I sit down at the desk, and those nuances are key.
Yeah.
And for finance, in my space, I've witnessed a lot of people want to make the move from engineering to finance. And I think it is a doable move. Depending on the market conditions, it's challenging. But if you're interested in finance, do things that you can talk to that demonstrate that interest in finance.
Okay.
So you have nothing on your resume that shows that you enjoy financial modeling and accounting and crunching numbers, and you show up to an interview and say, I'm interested in this. Someone's going to look at your previous experience and say, if you're really interested in this, why haven't you done anything in this space? So if that's a field you want to move into and you've really looked at finance, there's a ton of different boxes depending on the specific sector that you may need to check, but also just demonstrating, doing things that show deep and demonstrated interest in the field.
Both very wise and important pieces of advice. I really appreciate it. I think everyone's going to really benefit from that. Finally, to wrap it all up, for you, Nicole, what's next?
I don't know what's next. I recently switched jobs and I'm really liking the new space that I'm in.
Good.
And I want to keep learning and understanding how I can improve my expertise in a new area. And I think that's okay for now for me not to know what's next.
I really appreciate when people are like, I don't know, but I'm loving life. Because I think that just proves that not everyone has to have the next step sorted out. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I so appreciate it. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from everything that you said today. I think a lot of wise pieces of advice and a lot of pertinent